On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, we bring back the famous Locked On Raptors parlor game, What's More Likely? I throw out an either-or situation, and myself and the wonderful Vivek Jacob of Raptors.com will determine what of the two situations that I've thrown out are more likely to happen. It makes a lot of sense, okay? It's a good bit. It's all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1326 of Locked On Raptors for Tuesday, January the 24th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all of my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors, and you can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps. We're also on YouTube. Please go hit the big, fat, red subscribe button. You can't miss it, and you will have supported the show and done a very good thing to help me and stroke my ego and all that good stuff. It's also good for the algorithm and all that. Much appreciated. And the people who I appreciate the most are the people who can now be on the edge of their seats. I have brought out the branded Locked On bucket hat. Bucket hat? Trucker hat. That's what this kind of hat is called. Not a bucket hat. Silly Sean. And before we dive into today's show, we're playing What's More Likely with our pal Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com. I got an award, a winner, for the 2 tickets to the Rivoli on February the 7th, where I and a whole bunch of Raptors Republic dignitaries will be there to do a whole bunch of podcasting and live paneling ahead of the trade deadline on February the 9th. It's going to be a ton of fun, and as promised, if you sent me an email with a little detail on who your favorite deep cut Raptor is of all time, and also sent me a note about, sent me a screenshot showing that you subscribe to the YouTube channel like you should have done a long time ago, you are going to be in this hat now with a chance to go on and win those tickets. So let's do it now. Can I get a drum roll, Vivek Jacob, before we introduce you? Your first appearance on the podcast will be a drum roll. Ooh, look at that drum. All right, the winner of the 2 tickets is Martin Miller. Dun, 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 dun. Congratulations to Martin, who said Bismack Biyombo was his favorite deep cut Raptor of all time. Martin, I will be in touch with you to get you your tickets. To those who did not win, thank you for sending in your submissions, and hopefully we'll still see you there at the Rivoli on February the 7th. All right, business out of the way. Let's get to it. It's What's More Likely, everybody's favorite parlor game here on Locked On Raptors. And Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com, with the man with the wonderful drum rolling skills, is here. Big V, how the hell are you, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm without the shades this time, so
I'm glad to see it. Although the show is less sexy now, but it's, you know.
But if you do see me blinking profusely, it's because I just applied my ointment for the day that it still needs to heal. So that's my excuse for that. But yeah, besides that, pretty good, man. Can't complain.
You tune into this show for the drum rolls and the ointment talk. That's for damn sure. Tomorrow we go through our favorite ointments and places to apply them. No, we won't do that. All right, let's get this on the rails before we irreparably go off of it. As promised, today's show is a game of What's More Likely, and so we've got 3 What's More Likely scenarios. We're going to run through them all. We've got one about Precious Achiuwa. We've got one about the standings and how they're going to finish up. But first, let's dive into trade stuff, because that's all anyone can talk about these days is trade stuff, especially yesterday when you get all sorts of, vague rumors about vague 3-team trade concepts and all the stuff. Let's dive in here. Number 1, what's more likely, Big V? Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., or O.G. Anunoby has already played his last game in Toronto. Of those 3 players, who I guess is the most likely to have played his final game in Toronto, of course, the Raptors starting a 7-game road trip tomorrow night in Sacramento. They won't be back until just before the trade deadline in February the 9th. So Big V, let's hear it. Who do you think is the most likely to have played his final game at Scotiabank Arena in a Raptors uniform?
I'm going to go with Gary, the obvious answer. I think, where there's smoke, there's fire, and Gary's the one who's been most linked with trade rumors and the possibility of departing, and him seemingly being available most readily. So I'm going to go with Gary. I think if there were to be one of the core pieces moving. I think that's more likely in the off season.
Right.
And so for now, I think they'll just take care of, the minor stuff and then really look for major changes in the off season if that's the way they want to go.
Yeah, all of the the posturing and sort of looking at the roster and thinking about the deadline and shipping away Fred VanVleet for parts and all of this. While I still think those things could happen, I still think we could see Fred dealt if the price is right. I still think we could see an OG trade if the contenders who are one OG away from a title decide to really pony up and get into a crazy bidding war here. I don't think that's crazy considering the wide open nature of the league, but it does kind of feel like it might just be Gary, huh? And maybe that feels uninspired to people. And, I understand if you're upset that there's not more being done, I suppose, although I think you got to wait to see what the return ends up being. I got to ask you, I talked about this yesterday on my show. I'm not it depends on how it all goes down and what else the Raptors can get back. But the idea of a Gary Trent Jr. for Jakob Poeltl swap, for me, it doesn't quite feel like the right move, especially considering you got to pay Jakob Poeltl's next contract. And while I think he's excellent, I do have a little bit of concern about how he would fit and the clunkiness of the offensive fit. With a lack of shooting around him, which you move Gary Trent Jr. out, and there's a whole lot less shooting than there already is on the team, and there's not a whole lot to begin with. So curious on your thoughts on that sort of rumored framework. Again, rumored heavily in air quotes here because, who the hell knows where these rumors are coming from? It's Spurs blogs. I'm sure people have their sources and are just reporting what they've been told, but obviously they get told things for different reasons. Curious on your thoughts on the Poeltl for Gary Trent Jr. proposed swap that had Raptors internet melting down yesterday.
Yeah, Jakob Poeltl is a very good player. I just don't think he'd be a very good fit unless you have, other deals in place to address the shooting, right? Again, that's kind of been a theme when we've discussed the trade rumors is if you're trading one of Fred, Gary, or OG, you have to have a shooter, some type of three-point shooting coming back because those are the only three dependable shooters that you have on the team. And so I think that's where it complicates the fit. I think if you were to put Jakob Poeltl on the Lakers or the Clippers or, even, the Celtics have been rumored to be interested in him. Those are all great fits for him. So I think unless you've got contingency plans in place to address the shooting, whether it be another deal before the trade deadline or in the off season, because essentially that's what you have to think about, right? It's hey, do we think it's easier to address the center position or the 3-point shooting in the off season? And so if you're saying, okay, we got to bite the bullet now and deal with this terrible spacing for another few months, and then we go get a couple shooters in the off season, or you say, hey, we like what Gary brings to the table, we like his professionalism, everything, and then we'll just figure out the center thing in the off season. What's clear is the center thing has to be figured out.
Yeah, I should make it clear. Me suggesting that I don't love the Trent for Poeltl idea is not to suggest I don't think the Raptors need a center of some kind, because I think they do. It's pretty clear. They need someone who can do center things and just anchor the defense and do things that tall players historically have done in basketball for many, many years to great effect. They need that. I worry about, Poeltl, the free throw shooting is rough. There's just no even whisper of a 3-point shot. He doesn't even look at the rim when he's out that far. He never goes out that far because he's an interior guy. If you had him and you rolled it to starting five of just, for example, a Fred, OG, Scotty, Pascal, Jakob Poeltl lineup, probably a bear defensively. We can be very real about that. That would be a really, really difficult lineup to score on, even with Fred's point of attack issues. Guess what gets a lot easier to cover for when you have a real rim protecting center is point of attack defense issues. So, there's in theory a pretty good fit there if you can get, a modicum of shooting out of Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam combined. Siakam's been on hard times lately, of course. If you can then assemble some sort of roster of shooting behind that, then maybe that's viable. It's just there better be a plan in place if you're going to do that, whether it's this year or in the offseason. And yeah, it should also be clear, you might push back and say, well, who cares about three-point shooting this season? They're not going to do anything. They're not. And yeah, maybe that's true. But you have to use the deadline as also a part of your offseason, especially when you're a team like the Raptors. It's not a free agent destination. This is where you do a lot of your business and set yourself up for the summer. And so, again, there better be some sort of plan in place here if, in fact, Gary Trent Jr. is out the door. I agree with you. I think he's the most likely to be dealt at this point. I think I'm, pretty sure Fred's not getting dealt, and I'm feeling pretty good about the Raptors just bringing him back. I know that's going to make a lot of Raptors fans very angry, but as it turns out, he's very good, and he's been much better of late. And he's a guy who I think is just too much of a perfect on-paper fit with your best players to just go ship off because he had a bit of a rough start to the season. Quick thoughts on the likelihood of Fred. I feel like the likelihood has gone down as he has kind of maybe shown his first 35, 40 games to be a bit of an aberration as opposed to the beginning of the end.
Well, I never thought it was quite that high to begin with.
Sure.
I think if anything, it was probably teams thinking they had a chance to buy low on Fred, and that's where the rumors came out of. And so I don't think Toronto was ever going to consider, trading him on the cheap and getting pennies on the dollar. And I think they'll be confident about re-signing him in the offseason. And just because they re-sign him doesn't necessarily mean that they view him as part of the long-term plans.
For sure.
We've seen it, with Terrence Ross and Norman Powell and DeMar DeRozan, So I think they will probably view that type of deal as something that's better for the offseason. And obviously, once you get to the offseason, you're re-signing him and just kicking it further down the can.
Yeah, and I think the death knell for me for any potential Fred trade, first of all, the insiders don't seem to think it's all that likely. Mark Stein in his newsletter today was just like, the Raptors should just keep the Fred VanVleet, right? Because he's good. That's, the Raptors fans don't want to hear it, but Fred VanVleet, good at basketball, as it turns out. The other thing, too, is yesterday there were reports that the Clippers are not going to move on from Terrence Mann in any deal. And to me, the Clippers were really the only viable trade partner for Fred VanVleet that could maybe get you a return worth pulling the trigger on a deal. And if Terrence Mann's not going to be involved, then I am not interested in their ballast of salaries that the Clippers will be sending your way. Mann would have sweetened it all, but I don't think that's going to be on the table if they, in fact, view Terrence Mann as the point guard of the future, which you can decide whether that's a good idea by the Clippers or not. But I don't think if he's not on the table, I don't see really a viable Fred VanVleet trade out there anywhere at this point. We're going to move on. We got a couple more What's More Likelies, including Center Talk coming up in just 1 second here. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, brand new sponsor here with the network. We're super excited to have them on board as our official betting partner with Locked On because they are the number one sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better because they have so many great features that make betting on sports fun, easy, and accessible. New customers join today to get started with a $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. As I've said on this show before, when I do sports betting, which isn't very often, but when I do dabble, it's usually when I go to a game and I want to enhance the live experience, and that same game parlay is an awesome way to do that if you're going to be in attendance for a Leaf game, a Raptors game. Of course, the Blue Jays coming up sometime soon in the near future as well. All in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football, basketball, hockey fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL and of Locked On. And we continue on here with your first listen of the day, diving on into the second of our three What's More Likely scenarios today. Here is my next one here for you, Big V. What's more likely? The Toronto Raptors opening day starting center in 2023-24 will be Precious Achiuwa or someone else. Precious or the field as the Raptors starting five going into next season. I think this one is maybe a little less rote than the previous one, where Gary did seem like the clear odds-on favorite to get moved. Certainly in my head, where I'm just completely Precious pilled, it's very conflicting. I'm curious where you're at. The idea of Precious versus the field as Toronto's opening day starting 5 next year.
Yeah, so with this one, I do think it's closer than the first question. I will go with Precious Achiuwa.
Yeah, we love it. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, no, I think he's just a phenomenal defender. I think he eases, I think, that debate about Scotty Barnes in terms of, we know on the offensive side of the ball that being that playmaking big is his best role.
Yeah,
but defensively, he might not be best suited, to protecting the basket. And so I think having Precious in those positions, having him as that switchable big when you're defending pick and rolls is a really good option. And so I think if you have Precious in the starting lineup, then it eases life for Scotty Barnes. And he might be the best solution there. And, that's probably part of why we've kind of seen things play out the way they have past off season, coming up to the trade deadline now, in terms of how the Raptors have addressed the center position so far. Precious is the guy for me.
I don't know if you listened to yesterday's podcast, Big V. Of course you did, right?
Of course,
right?
always.
Right? Okay, well then you'll know the trivia question I'm about to throw at you, obviously. I said it yesterday, but I'll say it for those who didn't hear yesterday's show. Vivek, not one of them, of course. Where do you think Precious ranks among all players averaging 4 field goals defended at the rim inside 6 feet over the course of this season? It's like 153 players, I believe, that we're pulling from. Where do you think he ranks in that defensive field goal percentage inside 6 feet?
Like 3rd or 4th?
He's 5th. Yeah, he's behind Bismack Biyombo, Giannis, Draymond Green, and Jaren Jackson Jr. It's pretty incredible company. The 3 defensive players of the year of the last 10 years or whatever, and future 10 years, because Jaren Jackson Jr. is a freaking monster, and Bismack Biyombo, Martin Miller, our pal's favorite deep cut Raptor. Look at this synergy all over the place. But yeah, he's really good. And, I know those who are maybe itching for someone taller than 6'9" to be on the floor for the Raptors in the middle of the floor will say, well, this is just more of the same. He's 6'9". He's not big. If you can play like you're big, then who cares how tall you actually are? If you play like you're 7 feet tall, which I would argue Precious kind of does with the rebounding he brings to the table, with the rim protection he brings to the table, not to mention he can switch out in a way that not many 7-footers can. Maybe it does actually kind of work if the Raptors roll with Precious as their nominal 5, and it makes it easier to fill in your backup center position. Maybe it's Christian Koloko, maybe it's some Scotty Barnes, maybe it's, there's all sorts of different ways you could go, but it makes it a little bit less of a sort of pressure point where you must go out and allocate a ton of resources to that position. Again, all of the things we're saying today are probably going to make Raptors fans who are itching for change infuriated, but it's just, I don't know what to say. The team's in a weird spot. They very clearly believe in a lot of the stuff they're doing philosophically, and I don't know if enough has happened this year to completely throw them off of their original sort of peak vision for the team. And I would argue that the way Precious has played since coming back maybe means, hey, they were kind of onto something with this idea of rolling without a traditional 7-foot center. Not to mention, Christian Koloko will be a rotation player at some point. I feel pretty confident in that. People get excited. Jakob Poeltl, Miles Turner. No, it might just be Precious, and you might just have to deal with that and be all right with it. But again, Fred, O.G, Precious, Scotty, Pascal starting 5. Don't hate it. Pretty intriguing, if you ask me, depending on, of course, what you're able to do with Gary Trent Jr., what you're able to get back. It's, I know some Raptors fans hate it. A lot of the people you talk to are just like, this is not going to work. This is over. I just, it's way too premature, I think, to go and just tear the whole thing to bits, I would say. And there's internal solutions. This is why I've not thought this team is your typical run-of-the-mill 11th, 12th place team in the Eastern Conference, because there is upward mobility because of the youth of Scotty Barnes and Precious Achiuwa and whomever they draft in the first round this year and all that. So anyway, let's any last thoughts here on Precious? I mean, I want to get your sort of impressions on how he's played of late, because he's been an absolute blast, I think. Do you have any sort of observations on what's making it work for him and what's maybe giving you confidence that in fact he can be that starting five going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the defense is the defense. Like we saw that last year and what he's capable of defending 1 through 5. So I'm not going to say much on that. But offensively, I think he is improving in, attacking with pace and power, but also with some control. And I think there's confidence that stems from becoming a better free throw shooter.
Yes.
He's up over 75% at the line this season after shooting about 57 for the first couple seasons of his career. And so I think when you feel that confidence that, hey, I'm not just going to throw away a couple points here or 1 point every time I drive to the basket, then you're able to go there more consistently. And I think he's doing that. And the X factor is going to be the 3-point shot. I think if he can, be that 35% plus 3-point shooter, then he becomes an absolute no-brainer of a starter. But, if he's down at that 25%, then that's where the debate is.
I mean, there's a world in which Precious Achiuwa just entirely raises the ceiling of the Raptors as a franchise. He's that, I think, raw talented. Obviously, it's got to come together. But it's hard not to get really excited about what he could be when he's soaring through the air after going coast to coast for a delicate lay-in, or an enormous yam. He's got both in his bag, or he boots it out of bounds sometimes too, and that's also part of the charm. I think those who are dispirited by this Raptors season, Precious is a thing to get real excited about, I think, just in terms of how he could kind of tie it all together. It's delayed. This is not the year anybody wanted, but I don't think that doesn't mean that you can't get to where you want to go with a lot of these guys that you already have in store. And I think Precious is a big reason for that. We're going to continue on here, get to the final what's more likely of the day. Before we do that, however, just a reminder, Locked On Leafs is your daily Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. The Buds are real good. They're, I think, the number 2 team in the Eastern Conference. They're one of the best teams in the league this season. And our pals Mike DiStefano and Dave Morisuti are doing a great job breaking it all down every day over on YouTube. Go subscribe to there, in addition to Locked On Raptors, and support the show Locked On Leafs every single day. All right, Big V, the final what's more likely is standings related. Let's pull it up here, shall we? What's more likely? The Raptors make the play-in or finish with a bottom-5 record in the NBA. As it stands right now, they are 2 games behind the Chicago Bulls, who have won 3 straight games for the 10 seed in the Eastern Conference. The Pacers are on a bit of a free fall, 7 straight losses. Tyrese Halliburton, turns out, very important to that team's chances of being good. So you've got those sort of things at play. League-wide, the Raptors, I believe right now, hold the 7th worst record in the NBA. They are just ahead of the Washington Wizards, the Orlando Magic, a couple of games back, 2.5 games behind the Raptors. And then you get into the sort of the quartet of sadness and sorrow, the Spurs, Hornets, Pistons, and Rockets, who no one's touching because they stink. So really, the question is, are they going to pass one of Chicago or Indiana, or fall below 2 of, I guess, the Wizards and Magic are kind of the 2 teams there. The Blazers are slipping as well. They're in the conversation. So what's more likely, a play-in spot for your Toronto Raptors or a spot in the top 5 of the draft lotto odds? I know what the sickos are going to want the most here, but I have a feeling we might be disappointing them once again with our prediction here.
Yeah, so I think there's a chance that they end up bottom 5 in the East. I don't think they'll be bottom 5 in the NBA.
Sure.
So I will go with it being more likely that they make the play-in. I think when you look at the East, obviously you've got Detroit, Charlotte, Orlando. And I think with Washington, Kristaps Porzingis going down with that injury, them making the trade getting Rui Hachimura out of there. I think you can kind of see the wheels in motion for which way they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So
the Wizards declaring a direction? No.
And so I think that'll end up being the bottom 4 in the East.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think San Antonio and Houston are absolutely nailed to the floor of the West.
Is Houston doing a bit, man? Like, are they like, what is that art basketball they're doing? Like, it's unbelievable how bad that team is. Anyway, carry on. By the way, the Raptors play the Rockets on this road trip to near the end of it, which is not bad.
So yeah, I think between those 6 teams, it's going to be tough to crack, and the Raptors still might, miss the play-in. So
yeah,
right in between is where I most likely see them.
Yeah, I mean, if they are that 10 seed, or I guess the 11 seed, they'll still have a top 10 pick, which I guess is good. I've not been worried about where the pick lands between 8th and 16th, really. I don't care all that much. I kind of think the draft is a lot of voodoo, and I don't really pretend to understand it. But and that's not to denigrate the people who do a great job with the scouting side of things. I just think there's a lot that you can't account for scouting wise, and that leads to the draft being kind of unpredictable as to who's going to be good and where they're drafted. Either way, that's another Sean point that we don't have to get to today. I think. For me, I think it's more likely they also make the play-in. I don't think this is the type of team that's going to just shut it all down. It doesn't, and they don't have to shut it down. They're not shutting it down. They're playing their guys a million minutes a game already, and they're the 11th seed in the Eastern Conference. So they can maybe have the best of both worlds here. If the two worlds are horrible worlds, but the best of both worlds where they can try and not instill just a culture of just pissing away 3 months of a season because of draft lottery balls. Actually get some development going for Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, figure out the chemistry mix of the team that's been off so badly all season long. I think that's a big thing you want to try to iron out here. Get some answers before you go into next season if you can as to what's going to work, what's not. But even then, they still might be a team that is on the outside looking in. I think they're going to end up in the play-in. They're not as bad as their record suggests. They have a positive point differential. Very barely, but they have a positive point differential on the season. Yes, fake comebacks are part of that, but they also don't tend to get super duper blown out all the time. And that's I think the mark of a not wretched team. They've had not great execution down the stretch, all of that. But they have the 15th best net rating in the NBA. They have a top half offense right now, 13th in the NBA. Their defense has slipped obviously pretty miserably down to near the bottom 10, but it just feels like there's too much talent on the team for them to really bottom out. And I feel like they're going to end up in the play-in. And again, that's going to make a lot of people angry, but you have to just stop thinking about, if my team is 8th to 12th, that's bad. Yeah, it's bad in the moment, but it doesn't have to mean that they're going to be stuck on the treadmill of mediocrity for the rest of time. And I would argue especially so when you have, again, the likes of Scotty Barnes and Precious Achiuwa giving you plenty of upward mobility. So that's going to disappoint people. But guess what? Play-in for what? Play-in because it's fun. Play-in because the play-in games have been a blast to watch, and being part of them sounds like a pretty cool deal to me. And I think because of the Pacers slipping, Halliburton's injury, I think that maybe gives them an easy excuse to just kind of, coast the rest of the year maybe and not push all that hard and get the lottery pick they probably really wanted coming into the year. And I think they'll probably pass the Pacers. I also don't think the Bulls are that good, and I also don't think the Hawks are that good. And I think a couple of these teams could be passed by the Raptors between now and the end of the season, as much as that will anger everybody. Before we wrap up here, take a look at the road trip, Big V. It starts tomorrow. And I have a question for you about it. It's not a what's more likely. It's more just what do you think? Raptors play the Kings, the Warriors, the Blazers, the Suns, the Jazz, the Rockets, and the Grizzlies. Obviously, the Grizzlies are a monster of a team and will probably paste the Raptors because they paced everybody. They're incredible. Beyond that, the Kings are very good too. The Raptors played the Kings quite well earlier in the season. You could have argued they maybe should have won. But this road trip, I think, is deceptively maybe not that hard, and I could kind of see the Raptors maybe doing something here. Maybe this is just me continually being it's the corner's coming, they're going to turn it. The way I felt about Joey Graham for the last 15 years, he's going to figure it out. It's coming around. But it does maybe feel like, yes, this road trip is long and westerly, but it doesn't feel like it's like this sort of grindhouse of a road trip that's going to leave them 1-6, like it's the 2004-2005 season where they just can't win on the road at all. What are your sort of expectations and thoughts going into this road trip against some teams that are kind of going through it right now?
Yeah, I'm not too optimistic, to be honest. I think Golden State, you can say that they're struggling overall, but they've been a great home team, right? 6-18 on the road, 17-6 at home. So I think that's going to be a difficult game. Portland is always a tough place to play. Phoenix, they just got Chris Paul back. Cam Johnson is back as well. And Devin Booker might be on the fence at that point. So I think that'll be a tough game. Mikal Bridges is playing amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
Utah has obviously proven not to be a fun team to play against this season. So, yeah, on the whole, I see the Houston game as winnable. The most winnable one after that might be the Portland game. Even more so than Sacramento.
I think Portland kind of stinks.
Yeah. So yeah, at that point you're looking at 2 wins on the trip. And then if they beat Sacramento, which I'm not too optimistic about, then you're looking at 3. But that's about it for me.
I think I could see a 4-3. Again, I'm just constantly the toxic positive person over here, but I don't know. None of these teams are all like that horrifying to me. The Blazers, I think, are maybe just outwardly kind of bad. The Suns, we'll see if Booker's back. If not, I think the Raptors have a pretty good chance of, given that they always play the Suns quite well. Historically, I know this is a different year, but the Rockets,
Pascal definitely historically plays the Suns well.
He sure does. Pascal plays a lot of these teams very well, if I recall. The Kings, I believe he's put up multiple triple doubles against. The Blazers, he seems to score 35 every time out. The Jazz don't have anyone to guard him. As much as the Jazz are fun, that's going to be a Pascal matchup hunting fest, I think, in the Rockets. I can't wait to watch the Rockets game. They're just like I will never use like my own time to watch the Rockets because they're so bad and just like not a basketball team. But I kind of take a weird sick joy out of watching what an inept basketball team they are. They remind me of the Cavs back in like the first year or two after LeBron left again, when it was like Garland and Sexton just kind of figuring things out, and they did not seem like a basketball team at all. Weird that Kevin Porter Jr. is the common denominator between those teams.
Was it? I'm pretty sure it was last season that Nick Nurse went to the full court press for like 3 straight possessions, and Houston just kept turning it over. Like they just could not do anything.
I love the Rockets. Everyone should play like them. That would be like, we want stylistic diversity. No, I want everyone to play like the Rockets do, because that would be hilarious. Turnovers are fun. It'd be like watching minor hockey. The things that make minor hockey fun are the things that make the Rockets fun. Mistakes and a lack of defense. We're going to round it out there. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. And Big V, thanks so much for hopping on today. Anything you'd like to promote for the good people out there?
Usual stuff, Raptors.com. Most recently wrote about Scotty Barnes and the amazing January that he's having, so you can go check that out.
Pretty good.
Yep. And yeah, besides that, you can just follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Amazing. We'll be back again tomorrow. Katie Heidel's going to pop by. I might do a mailbag show. So if you have questions, please submit them in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or keep an eye out on Twitter for the prompt later on today if you're listening. And that'll do it. Go and find all of my stuff over on Twitter at Woodley Sean. Follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps. And of course, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can't win tickets to the Rivoli anymore by doing so, but you can support me in this free podcast, and that would be very cool of you. All right, we'll round it there. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.